Continuing education knows that at the end, students want to graduate, and we can help them do that because we take the time to really listen to their needs and we understand all the different options that are available across the campus for them.
We don't take a cookie cutter approach. We realize each student comes with their own story. So whether it's a part-time student looking to complete a degree program or someone just looking for online courses, we're there to connect them to the resources of the university.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's panel. My name is Jennifer Neale, and I will be your panel moderator for today. For recording purposes, today is Friday, April 12th, 2024. It is 10:30 a.m., and this is panel number 17923, titled All's Whale That Ends Whale, Conserving Our Wildlife Heritage. Before we get started, the University of Colorado Boulder, Colorado's flagship university, honors and recognizes the many contributions of Indigenous peoples in our state. CU Boulder acknowledges that it is located on the traditional territories and ancestral homelands of the Cheyenne, Arapaho, Ute, and many other Native American nations. Their forced removal from these territories has caused devastating and lasting impacts. While the University of Colorado Boulder can never undo or rectify the devastation wrought on Indigenous peoples, we commit to improving and enhancing engagement with Indigenous peoples and issues locally and globally. We will do this by recognizing and amplifying the voices of Indigenous CU Boulder students, staff, and faculty and their work, educating, conducting research, supporting student success, and integrating Indigenous knowledge, consulting, engaging, and working collaboratively with tribal nations to enhance our ability to provide access and culturally sensitive support and to recruit, retain, and graduate Native American students in a climate that is inclusive and respectful. One thing I'd like to mention is that we want to be sure you can get a chance to ask questions in the audience, and here's how we will handle the Q&A. We'll reserve the end of the discussion for that Q&A. We are using a note card system to receive questions from the audience. At any time in the session, simply raise your hand to request a note card and pencil from one of our producers. They are currently at the back of the room. And please write legibly. If you are a student, please note this on your question card. And then when you finish writing your question, please raise your hand and return it to a producer who will bring it up to me. I urge everyone to please make your questions brief and to the point. And now I will do a brief introduction of each panelist. And for more information, you can actually find their full bios on the CWA website. As I said, I'm Jennifer Neale. I am actually the Director of Research and Conservation at Denver Botanic Gardens. I'm a Boulder native. I did get my PhD here at CU Boulder in Ecology and Evolutionary Biology. And I have the great privilege of leading a team of scientists working to document and protect biodiversity throughout the region. My personal research does involve the use of genetic technologies to help conserve rare plants. And now for an introduction of our panelists. Immediately to my right is Flo Mazzoldi, and Flo has worked in technology leadership across many organizations with a focus on scaling design software products for the life science industry. In his current position, he runs digital technologies for Ginkgo, a biotechnology company that designs and engineers microbes for a variety of applications. To his right is Asher J. Asher is a National Geographic explorer and artist turned tech entrepreneur. She's the founder of Hennessine, where she advises corporations in how they can best model their strategies, outreach, and operations after nature. Her goal is to incite global action on behalf of wildlife. To her right is Kika Tuff, another CU Boulder alumna. Kika serves as the communication director at Revive and Restore, the leading wildlife conservation organization promoting the incorporation of biotech into conservation practice. Their mission is to enhance biodiversity through genetic rescue of endangered and extinct species. And on the far end of our panel is Ted Schmitt. Ted has a vast background from launching his career at IBM to holding a BA in German from Purdue. He currently serves as the Senior Director of Conservation at the Allen Institute for Artificial Intelligence. He has led efforts to bring appropriate technology for good solutions to a variety of terrestrial and marine conservation issues. You might be wondering where the title All's Well That Ends Well came from. And in the 1986 Star Trek film, Star Trek IV, The Journey Home, the Enterprise crew actually retrieved a pair of humpback whales from the 20th century, bringing them into the 23rd to prevent the Earth from being destroyed. So with recent advances in genetic engineering, we might never need to go to such great lengths as time travel in order to help save species and keep them on our planet. But de-extinction is now a real possibility, as is the potential to strengthen gene pools of many at-risk species around the world. And our panel will have a pretty lively discussion, I'm guessing, around biotechnology, conservation of species, and how those two go together. So I'm gonna give them each 3 to 5 minutes to start with a couple of opening remarks, broadly around the theme of how biotech is serving species in terms of conservation and how those two come together. And we're going to start off with Flo.
Hello. Oh. Hi, all. I'm Flo. As Jennifer said, I work in Ginkgo Bioworks. What we do at Ginkgo is we create microorganisms that solve problems. Problems like sustainability, or we address specific problems on sustainability or hunger or health. I can give some examples, but think about a microorganism that can chew plastic as an example of the kinds of things that we could do. So we normally do microorganisms because in general, as a field, we're not really good at engineering bigger things, but our mission is to make biology easier to engineer. So we do a lot of research and advancement on genetic editing and genetic engineering in general, synthetic biology, to become better at engineering biology. Lately, we've been applying AI. So as an example, we've been creating these large language models that can understand the language of DNA or proteins to see if we can advance our knowledge of how biology works. Hopefully, so that we can start to address better some of these conservationist problems that we currently have.
Great. Oh, and now on to Kika to give us her perspective.
Yeah, hi, thanks for being here. So I work with an organization called Revive and Restore. We are a nonprofit. We identify as a conservation organization first. And some of the exciting things that Revive and Restore is working on, we have a biobanking program with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to try and biobank all U.S. endangered species. So we're starting with mammals, but part of that idea of safeguarding what we have now in terms of genetic diversity. And then we also have cloning programs for endangered species. So most notably, we cloned the world's first black-footed ferret, Elizabeth Ann. I don't know if you remember her. She's still alive and well. And then other species like the Przewalski's horse, which is an endangered horse that sort of was functionally extinct across much of the Asian steppe. And then we fund other programs in the space of what biotechnology can do for conservation. So gene editing in coral or selective breeding to try and get warming tolerance, or building assays that can detect coral stress immediately. We also had a big breakthrough last year. One of the teams that we fund was able to cryopreserve a coral fragment for the first time, which doesn't sound like a big deal, but if you know anything about how coral spawns, it's like every so many years on a moonlit night in a tiny piece of the ocean, all the coral release their sperm at the same time, and if you happen to blink, you miss it. So biobanking coral has been a challenge for a long time, but if you can actually figure out how to cryopreserve a fragment, you can just go around and start breaking off little pieces and protect it forever. So those are the kinds of things we work on. A lot of it falls under the umbrella of genetic rescue. So we like to let people know we work on very precise tools that do very precise things. There are no silver bullets in conservation. Cloning a black-footed ferret can can be great in terms of restoring genetic diversity to a species or even just a population, but that certainly doesn't overturn an extinction crisis or anything. So we try and be really realistic and pragmatic, as we talked about in our applications, while also trying to de-risk some of these ideas and help people at least get used to the idea that maybe technology can be part of a solution in addition to conventional conservation tools.
Great. Ted.
Great, great. Thank you, Kika. That's a good introduction for me. So I'm at the Allen Institute for Artificial Intelligence. We have 3 main programs at the Institute. I'm part of our AI for the Environment program. I've worked for the Allen Foundation and now the Allen Institute for nearly 16 years, focused on applying technology for conservation. And we are using AI. It's a very powerful tool, as are the tools that the first 2 panelists mentioned. And there are really powerful tools and technology and the science to drive those that can help us, and we certainly are applying AI to do that, to help managers understand what's happening in the environment that they're managing, to be able to process imagery and data at a speed and rate that they just couldn't, no matter how many humans they threw at it, they couldn't do. So that is, that's a really, the power of AI, is to give the managers that are taking the action on the ground the ability to act more quickly, more accurately, and so on. So there's tremendous promise, as with the other technologies you heard. What we've also focused very much on is not just building the tech and the cool tech, and that does get the buzz. We've also focused very much on making sure that the tech we produce makes it into the field. And I've spent a lot of time, particularly in Africa, but elsewhere as well, making sure the tools that we're building are fit for purpose and that they're affordable. A lot of the places that we work are under resources and understatement. They can't afford a technology tool. Some of the technologies that we've built are actually quite mundane from a technologist perspective, but the technology never reached the people who needed it simply because they couldn't pay for it. And because we all focus on market, on profit driven, and we have to find a way to make a profit of something, there's a market failure and therefore a need that's going unmet. And that's a big part of what we also do. In addition to trying to push the technology forward, we really look for gaps where there is existing technology that could be applied to do a better job of management or whatever the conservation application is, and make sure that the technology gets there, gets to the people, and gets to them in a way that they can use it and have the capacity to use it. So I want to make that point very clear. All the excitement around AI and eDNA and genetics and on biotech and all those things, they're fantastic, and they give us new tools that we've never had, and we need those tools. We also have to make sure that those tools and their application get to where they need to be. And that's often the thing that everybody forgets because it's kind of the boring part. And so I want to make that point very clear, and I'll hand it to Asher.
Yeah.
Hi. So I guess I will start with how I've been closest to whales, since that's the title of the topic. So I actually have been pooped on by a blue whale, and I think that's pretty close, right? I was out in Sri Lanka, and we were working on whale migratory routes, and they have neon orange poop. So if you guys don't know what blue whale poop looks like, it's actually quite magical and like very brightly colored. And in regards to like technology, I have the unique privilege of being plugged in across the board, which I love. It's sort of like behaving as connective tissue between different efforts, projects. So I fill in sort of the blanks and blind spots between brands and nonprofits, between IoT devices and how we utilize that data. I was just on a call about microplastics with kids yesterday, and then today with Forbes Women. So it's like kind of all over the map, right? But ultimately what I'm looking to do is find this cohesion and unity between all of the different efforts that are being spearheaded, because people aren't often talking to each other and don't know who needs to be showing up in the space with them. I kind of fell into this role just out of sheer curiosity, love for everything, and I can't find the discipline to just do one thing. So that's kind of how I stumbled into this. And in regards to where I started with National Geographic, so I'm one of the atypical explorers. I work more on helping find ways to deploy solution sets to different markets through mass media technology, usually crowdsourcing participation, catalyzing public participation around that solution set by working with brands, nonprofits, and government agencies. So it's always around stakeholders, always around implementing change that would allow for mass behavior to shift. So you would start buying differently, you would start voting differently, you would do something that would shift the landscape within that particular theme forevermore. And so I realized in doing multiple campaigns like that around different species, different ecosystems around the world, and I also worked with Africa Parks, like Ted, and have spent time out in Africa with Africa Parks, and seeing sort of how incredibly committed so many entities are towards intentionally willing good in the world, but not being able to discern a way to be able to learn from each other, compare, contrast, and see where the failings and flailings are, right? We're very often keen to admit to our successes, but not own where things have not gone the right way, and then be able to learn from that collaboratively. It's almost like you feel like you're going to lose your donations, you're going to lose your fundraising abilities if you have fallen short of some expectation. But we learn through that too. It's just a process. You're iterating through that feedback, which as a startup owner, I'll tell you, like, you fail every day. So you just get so used to rejection and failure that you are sort of this embodiment of that you can show up as a stakeholder who's able to acclimatize others to that concept, right? And make it normalized as opposed to feel so threatening. And so what we get them to do is get that information osmotically transmitted between the stakeholders and then outwardly to the public without having to feel like you're going to get compromised for sharing that information. So that's the other side of Hennessy, is that we ensure that whether it's IoT devices monitoring real-time data changes. I don't know how many of you, if you just show me raised hands around, like, do you know about dynamic NFTs at all? Okay, so technology's come a long way, and I think it's freaking magical, and there's so much hope and solutions emerging around like ethical AI use, fair AI use, but also with blockchain technology. So we all know about like NFTs through the premise of like a collectibles market, trump cards, that sort of thing, right? But we don't know about the utilization of NFTs to like literally bookmark milestones, timelines, see how different people enter into a contract and break apart and what they get out of having shown up together. We can use NFTs to like monitor an ecosystem change over time. So like that's where we utilize the technology to get that feedback into a larger ecosystem that is publicly accessible. So then you as a person can go and see that this coral reef has changed in its health and in its diversity over time because the updates from the camera technology on the ground there in underwater is feeding continually back into the system. So you're able to monitor, but in a systematic way, right? Where you can compare one coral reef impact initiative with another. Right now, we don't have any kind of consolidating architecture for this. So that's where we come in, is like to fill in the gaps.
Great. So a question to kind of lead off the discussion. I'm curious to hear from each of you, what do you think is the biggest misconception in the public media around the use of technology for species conservation? Anyone want to, Ted, do you want to start off with that one?
The biggest misperception by the media?
Yeah, like that's shared in the media about the use of technology. So frankly, the term de-extinction, and how is that something that is something that's actively happening, and or is that a fabricated or blown up version of what's going on in the technology industry?
I mean, most things in the media are, I won't say fabricated, but blown up is a good way to put it. I mean, they have to tell a story and it has to be interesting and engaging. So they have to take a certain angle. We've had a lot of media about what we've done, and I'm sure that's true of the others here as well. It's always a real challenge to make sure that they get the story accurately told and don't focus on the sensational or overstate what's being done, and that while a lot of what's being done is is very exciting and innovative. It's also very grinding and takes a long time and isn't, I think, was it you that said there's no silver bullets? And I think maybe that's the thing, is that the media, because it's selling stories, sells them a lot as silver bullets and as a solved thing. And there really aren't any silver bullets. It's a lot of, we may come up with great technology. We have to build all that connective tissue to get that technology to where it needs to be. And that's not a very exciting story to tell in the media. So I think I would say that maybe is the biggest thing, is be very careful to look behind the scenes. I've also seen a lot of conservation tech get highlighted that's really cool and sexy and all of those things, and has no practical application. I'll give one very specific example. It was a university professor in a small conservation area in South Africa. They literally took all the animals out of a 10 square kilometer area, then brought animals back in. Every single animal had collars on, and then they observed whether they could tell whether a vehicle or humans were moving through the environment. And they could, but are we going to collar? Are we going to track every single animal in the environment? It was just a nonsense experiment, and there was $2 million spent on that, and to prove something that has no potential practical application. And that's the kind of stuff that drives me crazy. And that got a lot of press because it sounded cool.
Right. Kika, as a storyteller, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, well, I would say one thing that I work with a lot at Revive and Restore through media is kind of mitigating fear. Fear of intended consequences. That's the biggest thing we hear a lot. And I would say, we've sort of developed a communication campaign around trying to retire that argument, because in a lot of these cases, we are so out of options. Rhinos are a perfectly good example. There are 2 females left of the northern white rhino. But you're scared, we can be scared of, like, oh my gosh, we're gonna have to, like, genetically engineer sperm because they're not coming out of a living animal, and all the fear around whatever unintended consequences might happen can be abated by the fact that we don't have any other choices in some of these ecological crises. So, that sort of this narrative that comes up all the time, and people bring up kind of past horror stories like the cane toad. Like in 1910, they moved this frog, and it didn't even eat the pests. Like, okay, well, yeah, but we learned that lesson a lot, and we're not in 1910 anymore. People approach technology differently. People are more careful and strategic, and so that's kind of a big one that I fight with a lot, is if we're so scared to take action, then we just keep losing everything, and that's a bummer. So
Yeah.
I would say, there's so many examples where the sense of, utilizing technology as the quick fix, right? It's like the Band-Aid to what's occurring. So, if we use technology, we get the solution moving faster. It expedites the process of that exponentially. But in realizing that efficiency, what you're skipping, and it's not the technology's fault. What I would put it on is the human brain not catching up to wanting context for how the technology is being deployed. So you're not thinking through the fact that you've not given it a sense of belongingness and a sense of longevity, because literally, 2 examples. One would be with the white rhinos, met them in person, and there's, yes, only 2 females. I met when Sudan was still alive, the male was still alive. But say we are successful, which, right now we have enough technology biotechnology to enable, say, the cloning of white rhinos, right? Yeah. Oh, okay. So we have a first pregnancy, it's happened. So even with that, the modality around it, what is the environment they're going to be reintroduced into? Like, if you've ever met a white rhino, they're such gentle cows. They're so complacent and placid, and they're so mellow, So the only reason they've been wiped out to the extent that they have is due to human avarice and the illicit commodities market. That has not shifted, and we've tried farming rhinos, we've tried 3D printing rhino horns as if that's going to be a solution set. So we keep coming up with these technical ways to hack the fundamental pilfering of that ecosystem and the fundamental lack of values that is informing that greed mechanism that's allowing for that black market to exist. So until that gets addressed, what is the point of pumping so much money, such obscene amounts of money, because tech is not cheap. I am building a platform, and I cannot even tell you, it is ridiculous. I wish I could spend this money on actually just going out and saving a dog, because that would make more sense to me. But this is the world we live in. Yes, when the solution works, it scales and it has efficiency and efficacy, but in terms of the results, it is so slow, and you're spending so much money on something that may not even have a well thought out context for it. So that's where I'm reticent. And again, another example was a coral reef restoration project that we worked on. We figured out a way to create an anion, basically with diodes, figuring out the right balance with which corals can flourish on these structures that we created. And without going too much into the details of it, yes, the corals were beginning to propagate, they were beginning to come back. But then literally there was a port being built further, further up the coastline, and the sediment that came out of the dredging that occurred literally covered the entire coral project. So here we have spent, because there's no coordination at a policy level, no coordination with civil government, so then here's a bunch of researchers trying to do good in the world, have the technology, have the funding, and have executed a plan, and it got completely covered over by dirt, right? So it's what is the point of having spent that money? And so there is no real cohesion between the efforts, because no one's sitting together in the right rooms with the right personnel, and people are constantly being excluded from conversations when they should be the key stakeholders or the prioritized individuals who should be consulted before something is launched. So I just take a step back on yes, tech is absolutely a brilliant way to move forward, but it's so cost intensive that if you do not have the other variables all in place to ensure the technology can be adopted in its best use case scenario, it is a completely pointless, dilutive use of funds. And it could be better spent, honestly, on feeding people who are hungry, animals that are hungry.
Right. Go ahead.
Quickly back to media. That's absolutely, I agree with everything you said. And the media never tells that story because it's really boring, right?
Sad.
And they blame technology then, right? Because it's easier to say the tech is wrong than to say, yes, we never thought about having the important conversations that needed to be had. So it's always giving you sort of the wrong headline and focal point. It's more blame oriented than looking at where is the solution going to emerge from. And I think that's where I take issue with media. It's very binary and polarizing.
100% agree. From my perspective, I think the following up what they were saying, I think that the media portrays that we have these general capabilities of gene editing that can be applied to anything, and no problem, we can just clone without issue. And as Kika was saying, many of the solutions that we have are one-off, very expensive. It takes a very, very long time to apply anything. So Asher was talking about also how much she spends in technology. So all of this is enormously costly. But I agree that at the end of the day, the problem is, okay, what do we do with it? How do we apply that in the best possible way for the environment and for humans in the future, right? That's really, I think, the crux of hopefully what we're gonna keep discussing here.
And I would add also,
I want to counter one thing that you said about funding, because this is also something we run into a lot, is the idea that oh, shoot, that was $2 million wasted. That could have gone to feed dogs on the street, and we would have seen more return on that money, which is more of that kind of profit-driven thinking, return and outcomes, and was that a waste of money? I don't know, you tried to save a reef. Is that a waste of money or time? I wouldn't say so. But also I have found in the tech spaces in which we are working, these are not the same funders. They are not, the people who are going to give money to habitat protection are a very different group of donors than those who are excited about tech. So let's take everybody's money. And if you want to feed the dogs, great, there's a lot of infrastructure for that. Get that cause, give them your money. We attract people who are excited about the promise of tech. And that's a lot of money from a very different place. They don't pay to protect the forest. They want to see something else. And you know, all money, well, I won't say all money is good money in conservation, but we'll take a lot of money to try a lot of solutions. So it's not always, they're not in competition. You know, the message really is that everything can work together. We can attract different types of people with different types of projects. And failure is part of the game, but if you don't try and restore that reef, then it's never going to happen. And like, maybe you now have to go fight a development issue too. And
yeah, but that's the thing. It's like, I don't think we don't know that the development issue is not an issue before we put that reef into place, right? I think it's just myopic that we went in proactively to put in a reef before even consulting on development projects along the shoreline ahead of time. And we should have had a conversation with the city council. But the other side of it, I mean, I was initially going to be like, I'm countering myself, but I'm going to qualify myself, which is to say, to add to what you were saying, which is, yes, there's a part of me, because I will always be the person who argues first and foremost against myself, because that's part of like the growth process. If you don't check in with yourself and give yourself your own limits, then you're not actually going to qualify your effort any better. You get complacent. But I would say, like, I often weigh this out, right? I'm like, is this the best use of my resources and time? Is this the best use of funding and energy and personnel towards an outcome? And the reason I continue building the platform I'm building is because we do not have any systemic framework out there to compare impact initiatives, to hold brands accountable, to hold impact deliverables accountable. And there's nothing that is public-facing, that is truly stakeholder-driven. We talk about all these things endlessly, but there's so much opacity in this space that I absolutely feel committed daily to bring accountability to that space. Having said that, like, when you invest in technology, yes, it's very expensive, but you're also building something that can scale a solution like exponentially. It's pretty incredible and inspiring to see something fill a hole that was previously just seemed like an abyss, and it got plugged in overnight, right? And then you see it scale across the board, across the world. So there is that beauty of seeing technology be the answer. But again, I will always emphasize two things. One is, how do we prioritize what needs to get done and what sequence we need to be doing it? So if we haven't protected the overall range of the habitat, there's no point putting in a coral reef solution. If we have not addressed the poaching crisis, there is no point cloning an animal. So fundamentally, if we have not thought about the priorities and the sequencing of those priorities, and we don't have all those stakeholders engaged, what is the reason for the technology being funded? I don't think it's viable. And so I do think we do need to have those conversations and be honest with ourselves. And the other side of it is also in terms of what can your technology actually deliver on. I think technologists tend to be a rather arrogant bunch, right? Like, we do have the hubris of technology, which we should be mindful of. And so you think that it can do everything and anything, and it can't. For instance, I know my limit with my technology is, yes, we do want to connect and communicate with IoT devices, but if that IoT device is not monitored and it's not giving you the right data inputs, you're just feeding false data into an accountability framework, and people are receiving basically just fabricated data, right? Or false data, or inaccurate data. So it's like, it doesn't matter how much you build around accountability, if ultimately the information coming into that system is fabricated, we still need checks and balances for that, right? And to adjust and modulate expectations accordingly. So I think just bear everything in mind as a whole versus looking at it as one silo and going after it.
Yeah.
I'll pick up the funding part of it. I do think that we need to figure out a way to funnel more money into these initiatives. In general, I think culturally, the younger generations have a higher, put a higher weight on these initiatives than we older folks do. So I think that is going the right direction, because if people think that something is important, they will drive more money through it. And one of the, I think, from my perspective, one of the issues that we have with many of these initiatives is that the communication and the way that we're explaining and that we're trying to convince the public that they are important is not as effective as others, like sexy technology. So I think that there needs to be more effort on communicating the needs and communicating the value of these initiatives in a way that it overall continues to increase the cultural demand for it and shifts more money towards those initiatives going forward.
Great. I have a question from a student. What direction do you see the international trade of endangered animals going in regards to conservation, in particular regarding tech? So,
So my very first project in conservation, which was 12 years ago now, was called the Great Elephant Census. It was the first project that Paul Allen funded, and it was the first time that all 20 savanna range state African savanna elephant range states were surveyed at the same time, or within a 2-year period. And the output of that was provided as input to the African Elephant Specialist Group, who has the mandate from CITES, that's the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species, to provide the data and their conclusions and recommendations to CITES about the policy. And so I got to follow that whole process. It's an ugly process, but at least the process exists. I do think that having a convention on the trade in endangered species is already an oxymoron in itself. Why are we trading endangered species? But we do have a convention to at least put rules around it. So I guess that's better than a vacuum. Tech absolutely plays a critical role because, and some of the new tech can play a much more important role because, frankly, the data that CITES has used to make a lot of its decisions has been very limited. For some species, it's almost non-existent. So they're basically just making a guess, and who wins out on that? The people who want to trade because they want to make money on the trade. Also, it could play, and it's not yet, but it could play a big role in making sure the rules are actually getting enforced. So if you do want to trade in endangered species and you've got to get a CITES permit to do that, you, right now, that is literally in the 2024 still on a piece of paper with a stamp, and you get a stamp and there's no controls over that, and if you pay the right person in the right country, you can get your little permit with your stamp. That should all, and they have been working on an e-permitting system, but both on the input, what is the actual status of these species, and how should that influence the trade status on a given species, and then on the output, we've put the rules in place. Are we managing and monitoring the trade to follow the rules we've put in place? Neither of those, both of those require data and could use technology. They're also, especially on the output side, kind of boring. It's a permitting system, but there is effective technology. It's just not being used. On the input side, some of the tech that folks are doing on eDNA, on all sorts of sampling about the abundance and the distribution of species, holds huge promise for understanding the actual status of these species. We don't actually understand the status of most of these species very well at all. And that makes it really hard to decide trade policy. So anyway.
Yeah, and one specific example I've worked on a little bit is like rapid sequencing technologies. So, one thing about shark fins is if you chop the fish up, like maybe the regulator doesn't even have any idea if this is an endangered shark or a common shark. Some shark can be eaten, some shark cannot be eaten. Really basic stuff like that where, chop it up and put it in a jar of liquid, and then you really don't even know what's in there. But rapid sequencing technology, you can run that stuff and you can see, what is this species? What's this fin? What's this other part? So I think in the regulation kind of trafficking space, there's some pretty cool tech happening to try and at least solve very near-term problems of you don't even know what you're looking at half the time. Could we just start there?
There really is. We actually funded a group to do wood. There's a lot of trees that are getting trafficked that are very endangered. And there's some folks who've created a thing to be able to get a sample of the tree and turn it around very quickly. And I think, again, it's important who's your user. The users of that part of the system are the customs officers. They're under immense pressure to move unbelievable amounts of commodities through the system. And every second they hold a shipment up is money for the companies. And those companies will go lobby the politicians and say, this is not okay to hold up our shipment. And so they need tools that they can very rapidly sort, like, this is suspect and we need to dig further versus, yeah, let's get this going. So those are the realities. And frankly, that moving the commodities prioritized over whether there's an endangered species in the mix of the commodities.
And I would add to that because I worked a lot on demand reduction of ivory. And one of the things the technology enabled us to do was to go into the seizures, the stockpiles, and actually look at the constitution of those stockpiles. And we realized a lot more forest elephants were being slaughtered than savanna elephants in the seizure in Singapore, for instance, right? So each stockpile shows a different mix of what ivory was in it and like where it was actually acquired from based on the isotopes. So I think those kind of inputs helps because then you know where to bolster your on-the-ground boots, you know where to have greater surveillance. So I think knowing comes from technology and knowledge is powerful. But again, if it's being utilized in ways that derives towards a source level solution as opposed to just dealing with the symptoms, then you're having a fundamental shift occur that's beneficial for all.
I want to just add one more thing, sorry. I had a question once from one of the engineers that worked on my team and said, why are you all so worried about elephants? I mean, if there were no elephants on the planet, it would make no material difference in my life. Like, I don't really care if there are elephants now. He didn't stay around very long because he wasn't very motivated to work on what we were working on. But it's a valid question, and you talked about values. And yes, we can build tech, and I can give you a list of tech that we can build to help manage the trade in endangered species, to understand what the species populations are. But if we don't have shared values around how many elephants, people hate it when I ask this question, but I think it's a really profound question, is how many elephants should there be? It's actually up to us humans to decide. For good or bad, we run the planet. We decide what animals are on the planet at this point because of the power of the technology and our ability to change the environment. If the answer is purely economic, yeah, people like to go on photo safaris and take pictures of elephants. You could probably have 10,000 elephants and do that. There's enough genetic diversity in 10,000 elephants that everybody that wants to go on safari could go and do that. But is that what we want? What does it mean for a species to be endangered? There are about 400,000 savanna elephants and maybe 100,000 forest elephants, African elephants. Asian elephants are actually even more endangered. But what does that mean to be endangered? And those are not technical questions.
Yeah.
We can provide technical solutions to help understand if the values we've expressed are there and if we're following those values, but we can't set the values.
And I would say, adding to that, it's like, are you going to be egocentric or ecocentric, right? And I think there's something to be said about all technology being anthropocentric versus not being, and actually bearing in mind there's a lot of science out there that has studied elephants, and what's optimal for an elephant population is different from what's optimal for us. So are we going to do everything through our lens, or are we doing it through an inclusive lens?
That's a great question. Flo, I actually have a question for you from the audience where they want to know more about plastic-eating bacteria progress and kind of how is that moving along and how could that help get at some of those things that Asher's talking about with kind of the bigger picture of those pressures on ecosystems.
Yeah, so number one, if we could make that, when we make that happen, how about that? When we make that happen, we're going to be able to digest and degrade a lot of that plastic that is obviously very harmful for these ecosystems that we're trying to protect. So that's the impact of that to this conversation. Where are we at? It's going through our platform. We don't have the microbe yet, but we're working on it. We're working on it together with another like 120, 130 other organisms that do other things.
Great. So I have a question. Given that conservation biology is really a crisis discipline, I think those of us who work within that field really come from a place of hope. And that we, as you know, Kika and Asher and really the whole panel have referred to. So kind of for each of you, what is your greatest hope about the use of technology and how it can help us conserve species in like the midterm, let's say? Anyone?
You want to go first? You want me to go first?
Why don't you go first? I've been going first. I'll let you go first.
I can start with an easy one. I love
There you
what
go.
Kika's
Good
team,
idea.
Kika's team is doing on just bottling up some of the biodiversity that we currently have, so that if later, when we get better at doing this, we can use it in some way. Because a lot of what happens today is if species went extinct in the past, we don't have a way of going back and getting that genetic material to do anything with it. So I love the biobanking and being able to like have inventories of the genetic material in a way that when we solve all the other problems we've been talking about in terms of, okay, how do we apply it? Should we? Do we need to? All of that, we could. Because if you look back, we really can't, because a lot of the materials that you would need in order to apply those solutions are just not there. So I love that.
I can add to that. So I would say, you know, when you infuse, because, okay, coexistence is a spiritual state. It is not a technical state that you reach through knowledge and through technological solutions being deployed. So the solutions that work best are ones that marry technology with indigenous knowledge, indigenous communities, empowering enough stakeholders into the ecosystem, infusing a true sense of agency and autonomy across the board, allowing for participants to show up to enable the end solution being realized together, because it's already starting together, so it has to end up together.
And don't try to explain that to an engineer, by the way.
No, I would never say this to my technical team. But I would say that like I've seen happen, and that's what brings me hope. So like there is a network in rainforests, like in the Amazon, for instance, where indigenous tribes can immediately report on logging despite being off the grid and living twice removed from humanity as we know it, like progress as we know it. But they still have access to a handheld device that can alert a sensor and give input on real-time deforestation rates. So I think those kind of feedback mechanisms, those ways of collating data, those ways of understanding the relevance and value of trees, not just to humans as it's being extractively exploited, but also from the perspective of like other communities that might be reliant on it as a sense of home, as a sense of place they have as a context. So I think it's just looking at it from as many filters, and the more filters that are accounted for early on, the greater the application of that technology, the longer it's going to find application. But also ultimately, if you're looking at it from a for-profit angle, you have multiple use cases and therefore sustained revenue that is like longevity oriented. So as a company as well, it makes more sense to be viable for longer, feasible for longer.
Yeah, and I'd say, you know, when you work in the space of extinction, climate change, loss and degradation all day long, it's very difficult to stay hopeful sometimes. I do think this is where projects like the Northern White Rhino, like what's the long-term vision here? I don't know, but we have our first pregnancy, and as long as they're still on Earth, it feels like there's a chance. So a lot of Revive and Restore's work in biobanking and coral cryopreservation and things like that, which, you know, don't necessarily have immediate outcomes, right? They're sort of backup plans, and they're not that great of backup plans, but it's something. And you feel like as long as you have living cells from a species, and we keep getting better at bringing things back and creating sperm and eggs out of skin cells and doing all kinds of technologies like that, I feel like there's a chance for recovery. So I try and look for hope where I can. Coral is this really challenging space where, every time you look at the ocean, until the ocean is cooler, all of these nursery programs and kind of restoration activities will struggle because, you put the coral, I don't know if you're following coral much, but, in Florida, they had a huge coral gardening program It was doing really well. They were seeing progress. It was super exciting. And then last year, the waters were 115 degrees for multiple weeks on end. And they just went and pulled everything back into the tanks. So there has to be a lot of forgiveness in this process of people trying really hard and getting it wrong and stepping back and saying, like, okay, the forces are bigger than just this. You know, we need to reassess, constantly reassessing. But as long as people are trying, it feels like there's a chance. And that's just really an important part of doing any of this work and engaging in conservation as citizens and professionals. Then you all know how trying it can be. I do just want to say one more thing real quick. You actually brought this up in our panel yesterday on entrepreneurship, that there's a little bit of kind of forgiveness that needs to happen in the corporate spaces. People are so scared to pledge, like, we're gonna, fund this initiative. And you're like, but you're part of the problem, like, fuck off. So, there is kind of this, we're gonna come into some really ethically challenging spaces. We have to welcome everybody who's showing up to the table to do the best that we all can, because that's kind of the state of things, so.
Yeah, and I'd add just to that very quickly, is that we don't seem to understand that we can be in conflict within our own selves, right? So why couldn't a corporation be in conflict with itself too? Right. We can think two completely opposing thoughts. Like, I could want everything right for the planet and still eat meat. And that's a conflict I hold within myself every day, right? And that may not be or any other kind of conflict. You could say that you care about, recycling and do everything right and still take a plastic cup because it's convenient in that moment. So I think we have to be forgiving of each other because we ourselves do so much that is not always aligned. So why don't we, but a lot of people are not forgiving of themselves, they're so self-critical, so self-hating. So we live in a really violent time where there's no love. There's so much fear, so much anger, so much anguish, but just self-love and love for others, just come to that space, and then from there, technologies we give rise to, everything we do, we'll be able to create space for and hold space for and be forgiving of one another for.
I think, yeah, completely agree. Technology and hope. So yeah, it's very easy working in this space to lose hope and sort of decide I don't need to get out of bed today because what's the point? Everybody's working against me. But then I do get out of bed and I do keep fighting the fight. And I think really everything everyone's here is doing, and the people that I work with, you really pretty much have to view it right now as holding a finger in the dike. We're buying time. We're buying time until our values with technology and with other things, until we as human beings value the other species that we live with on the planet, and frankly value ourselves, because ultimately this will boomerang back on us. And we're not doing that, not sufficiently right now. We're very short term in our what we want versus the long term. So the hope comes in, first of all, that there are people that do get up every day and fight the fight, and I have the great privilege of knowing a lot of them, including having met the people on this panel and many other people. And there are people in Africa, in the remotest places, who are deeply committed to wildlife conservation, and they want the tools to be able to do that. And I think the other thing, what I would say, what gives me hope, is that technology. I always say this to my technologist friends, and they don't like hearing it, but it's true. Technology is a tool. I don't care how powerful it is, whether it's genetic editing or AI or you name it, it's a tool. What we do with that tool is what's important. And the hopeful thing is that we have a new set of tools, incredibly powerful tools that we in our human brains have come up with, that can actually help us do a much better job of managing the natural world that we live in. I mean, this is an amazing little planet that we live on, and we're destroying it. And so, but the technology gives us the tools. It has the potential to give us the tools to do a good job. And that's very, very hopeful. but we do have to catch up. We have to get those medieval institutions and Paleolithic emotions. I'm quoting E.O. Wilson again for the probably the 10th panel, but we have to get those institutions and our emotions, and I think that's what Asher just so eloquently expressed. We have to catch those up with the technology and the tools we have. We have the tools. Let's bring the other things up.
Yeah.
Can I add one thought to that? I think it's important to say that the best tool we have is indigenous ecological knowledge and the communities that ran this planet for thousands of years and did it well. We are a short-term thinking species. Technology is another tool that hopefully helps us kind of, put some Band-Aids on and put our finger in the dike. But as long as we are also talking to the communities that have been on this planet the longest and done this job well for a really long time, that's another growing thing that is hopeful, is that we are starting to engage communities that do know how to do this, and they do it without technology and have forever. Yeah. The integration.
I can actually, over the 10, 12 years that I've been doing this, there was very much we'll say the global north coming with their technology and saying, here's these drones, here's these things, we can fix everything for you. And they're like, fix what? And you haven't involved us at all. And that is starting to change, and Asher touched on it. We're really purposefully trying to make sure that we're putting the technology in the hands of the local communities so that they have agency to feel empowered to manage what the spaces that they love and care about. We weren't doing that. We absolutely, when I say we, I mean the global north. We were all like, hey, we messed up our spaces, we killed all the buffalo, now we want you to save all your elephants. And we're not going to worry about whether you're going to be able to economically develop like we all did. And they're like, well, wait a minute, that's not fair. And they're right, that's not fair. So anyway, giving them that agency with the technology is really important.
And I would say also the greatest technology is just the living system itself, right? So why are we doing so many carbon sequestration programs? Like idiots, we've installed these, I don't know if you've seen those silos that have plankton in them with water as decarbonization aspects, technological solutions being instituted in your park benches. Plant a tree there instead. Take the concrete out, put a couple of trees there, And so we go after these complex solutions sometimes where I'm you have living things that are doing that solution so much better that can be exponentially scaled for a fraction of that cost. And that's when it gets on my nerves when people are like, oh, technology is the answer for everything. It's not, And I think we underestimate the technologies that are naturally created and exist and have been tried and true and perfected over millennia, deep time that we do not comprehend. So we should have some level of humility and reverence for the living framework that we're a part of and should bolster through every one of the technologies we build.
It goes to the field of biomimicry of let's look at what nature has been doing well for so long and then capitalize on that. And I will say, as a botanist, we also have to be very hopeful. I'm trying to save little plants on the top of mountains, not the charismatic white rhino. So I also come to it from a place of hope. So this is a question from the audience that I think we all knew was coming, given that the premise of the panel was about Star Trek and sci-fi. Is there a Jurassic Park type of danger in genetic engineering in animals, or is that just, a movie that creates an unrealistic expectation?
Yeah, well, Mike, go? Okay, there we go. Well, I tend to work in the spaces of de-extinction, and this comes up a lot. Definitely Jurassic Park is a movie, and we won't talk about any of the flaws. Actually, if literally anyone in the film had a gun, you could shoot a T-Rex and it would die. So we're not going to necessarily unpack the movie, but what is the state of kind of de-extinction in the world of biotechnology? It's still big, and it's still a total moonshot, and I think everybody is grappling with the idea that it sounds really cool, and whether it's actually feasible is yet to be decided. This is true of in Jurassic Park, they had the genome of a Tyrannosaurus Rex, and they were filling in gaps with that of a frog. And we're really working in the opposite direction. We have fragments of DNA from extinct species, and we're trying to actually take a frog and reverse engineer a T-Rex out of the tiny fragments that we have, and we really don't know how to make a frog as big as a T-Rex, and we probably don't even know how to give it claws, and actually maybe we don't understand, whether, in the case of the mammoth, which is probably on a lot of people's brains, like, even if we could really figure out, like, wait, which genes turn on hair development again? And can we make sure that they don't affect liver function? And how do we give it really big tusks without running into really big poaching problems? And, like, we don't know how to give it a big forehead without not, like, messing with brain function. So even as we're proceeding in these paths of creating proxies, and it's important that everybody understands true de-extinction is not possible at all. It is a quest to create an ecological proxy for something that we lost, taking the closest related species and trying to make it look and function like something that's gone. It's outside the scope of this panel, whether the ethics around that. But true de-extinction is a myth anyway. The best thing we can do is conserve what's here. And yeah, I'll stop there.
Ted wants to come.
Yeah, I want to give another science. There's another science fiction-y topic that is interspecies communication, and there are some people working on trying to understand the language of whales, for instance.
Project SETI.
It's very exciting. What's that?
It's called Project SETI, CETI.
Yeah, yes, exactly. And I'm going to give a little plug. There's a book that's launching next week, and I have a chapter in there called Interspecies Future, a primer. Look for it. And it's the part that I'm talking about is a lot less science fiction. Animals are already telling us a lot. We have a lot of animals that have collars that tell us how they're using the environment. Scientists are doing amazing work with understanding how they use the environment, when they have fear, all of these things. So they're already, through technology, already telling us a lot about how they live, how they feel, how they use the spaces. So those are less science fiction-y, but we're not drawing all the lessons we could from those, and that's part of what the piece that I've got in there talks about. But there's a lot of really cool work going on trying to understand. And why is that important? Well, if we understood how these species exist, if they could communicate with us, maybe not with words, but in some way tell us about their families and all of this stuff, maybe we can have more empathy for them. Now, we can empathize with other humans, although of course we also fail badly with humans as well, and we all have our conflicts, and we can name a list of them right now, from individual ones to national ones and so on. But that potential of being able to understand and have other species communicate with us by whatever communication means does open a possibility for empathizing with them more.
I think that's a great point. Another question from the audience. We have about just over 5 minutes left. Flo, I'd like you to address this one. Isn't technology also part of the problem? So, for example, there's chemical effluents from chip manufacturing and landfill overcrowding from disposal of obsolete devices, among other issues.
Yeah, absolutely. Like the all over the place.
Yeah.
We are polluting the environment, and we're conflicted, right? Like on one side you have all the pollution going on, and how driven mostly. I would channel my panelists here. Driven mostly by profit. On the other side, we have all of these efforts about conservation that I think are getting more and more value from culture. I think that needs to continue, and for me that's very big, because it should drive more attention, and it should drive more resources to that, so that we can stop the cases where we're screwing up the environment, or revert it, whatever, right? Like the plastic chewing microbe.
Yeah. Anyone else want to address that?
Yeah, I would say, like, do you want to throw the baby out with the bathwater? Because some of these things do take, and that's where when she says, you know, you've got to be forgiving of the learning curve. With renewable energies, for instance, or even your smartphone, like we are mining rare earths in the most unsustainable way. When you look at it, you're like, I don't want to talk to another human being. I'll throw my phone away. But then tomorrow morning, that's the device you wake up to, right? So there is the reality versus sort of what you would like to galvanize to it because you're just fed up of seeing kids being employed in the Congo digging for these rare earths like cobalt, or like, you know, you see sort of the worst of all of these things too, and it makes you want to quit. But can you ever go back to that which was before, when we've gotten so habituated to what is normative now? So that's why I always say now, you know, have that compassion for self and also cultivate an understanding of like a reality check on what can be done given where we are truly versus where we would like to be in theory but is not feasible in execution at all. And that's the gap we can move forward with daily. And that's the forgiveness we also need to extend to any of the efforts being deployed in the space. Because as we're iterating through and as we figure things out, we can replace these materials. Maybe by then we've already destroyed and damaged everything and it's too little too late, but it is part of that learning curve. And if it comes from a greater understanding, from having done the self-work, which I don't know how many CEOs, most of them are psychopaths or sociopaths, but if more of these people were cultivating from a holistic space within themselves and were self-integrated wholes, then they would be accounting for the whole in every one of their decision-making, which would come down to even your sourcing and supply chains. So I think, you know, it's about having that whole cultivated within you, which we don't emphasize enough. We don't do self-work enough.
Asher, I'm gonna draw a line here. I'm from Argentina. There is a line, okay? I'm not stopping to eat meat. I mean, that's like, I don't think you can convince me, like, anyway.
I think if we take a broader perspective on technology, it's probably always been the problem. Even if we sort of go back to like pre-colonial times, like, yeah, I don't want to turn into Jared Diamond, but guns, germs, and steel. I mean, it's sort of, innovation has always been this big challenge. The technological revolution is the beginning of the hockey stick of climate change. And, but you know, your sort of modern technology as we know it, if we had to assess, like, is that really the problem? I mean, I'm totally just out of my element rambling here, but I don't actually think modern technology is going to be nearly as problematic as like the original innovations and things that carved up the landscape, you know, shot all the buffalo, like all of those early days when we were out for total annihilation in some ways of people, of ecosystems, of species. Yeah, that's been that has disproportionately gotten us into this position, I think, more than necessarily mining for the materials that go in your phone, and really like all the amount of things you don't have to do because you do it digitally now, all the paper saved, all the storage and crap saved, like. So I don't know, I'm not actually a technologist, even though I work in technology spaces, but I think it's easy to lump sort of all of innovation across time as technology, but we were way worse before. We're pretty thoughtful about, we at least have systems for electronics recycling. Like, you know, we're kind of in a different space as far as total annihilation from technology. That is social issues aside.
Yeah, I guess what I would go back to is that, as what I said before, technology is a tool. Technology is not the problem. Science is not the problem. It's what we do with those things that's the problem. We are not going to stop people from seeking knowledge, and that's what science and technology is. It's seeking knowledge. And those are good human activities, but what we do with the outputs of those activities is the problem. And it goes right back to the values. I always get frustrated when people say technology is the problem or science is the problem. It's not. It's our values that are the problem. And yes, the technology does give us powerful tools to wreak a lot more damage than we could before we had the technology, but they're not actually the root of the problem. Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you, panel. We are at the end of our time. I think this has been a really nice discussion. I hope that you all got a good sense of kind of where we are in terms of wildlife heritage and conservation from here going forward. Thank you.
I had to.